Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Eckhart, and welcome to Partners in Pain webinar today. I'm going to be your facilitator today, so thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, I just would like to acknowledge the land we're on. I would like to acknowledge that currently I am in Treaty 4 territory in the homeland of the Métis. Recognizing this history is important to our future and our efforts to close the gap in health outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. I pay respects to the traditional caretakers of this land. So the Partners in Pain project grew out of the Improving Pain in Saskatchewan collaborative research project. That sounds really fancy. And it was fancy, it is fancy. The research project aims to give pain a voice by bringing people together to share information and plan action to improve how pain is managed in our province. The research project led to our first pilot series, Partners in Pain webinars in March 2021, almost a year ago. Our first webinar was, I think, a year ago tomorrow. I was looking back at our dates. I think a year ago tomorrow or next week, I can't remember. The feedback from the pilot was very positive and led the research team to seek additional funding to help support the continuation of the webinars. Partners in Pain received a generous grant from the Community Initiatives Fund Community Grant Program in mid-2021 for an additional series of webinars, which is what brings us here today. And all of this work is supported by Saskatchewan organization, which is on a mission to help improve the lives of those living with pain in Saskatchewan. I also want to acknowledge our sponsor for today's session, the Saskatchewan Workers' Compensation Board. Thank you to WCB Sask for their support of the Partners in Pain webinar. So just a couple reminders before we get started. Please keep yourself muted. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. We'll have a question and answer period each time after each speaker. You can use the chat box as well too. We're certainly happy to see all your faces. So feel free to keep your video on. But if you're having connection issues, the easiest thing I find sometimes is just to turn your video off, because then you're not buffering and you're not trying to get as much speed. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker for today, Susan Gellert. So Susan completed a degree in social work in 1994 and has worked in both the medical and education fields in counseling, management, facilitation, and support. She is presently working for the Saskatchewan Health Authority as a home care assessor coordinator in Foam Lake and surrounding area. Susan is married to a grain farmer in East Central Saskatchewan, and they have 6 adult children in their blended family. Susan states that one of her soapbox passions is normalizing the grieving process and talking about grief that occurs throughout life and not just at the end of life. It is her sincere hope that if people start to recognize the cycles of grief in both everyday occurrences and life transitions, then real conversations will happen and people won't feel so alone. And she's also my personal best friend, so I needed to get that plug in there. So when I asked her to do the presentation, she very willingly agreed. So I will give the floor to my brilliant friend, Susan.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for the welcome. I am going to tell you that somehow today I just disappeared, and then it told me I had no internet. So if I disappear, I promise I'll come back. So don't worry, I am at work, so I'm not sure if they're just cutting me off or what's going on. So before we get started, I wanted to tell you thank you. Thank you for having me here. Please don't see me here as an expert. I'm just here to share what I know, what's important to me. I come at this from a couple different angles. It's part of my work that I do. I work with a lot of people who have lots of different challenges at different areas of their life. I'm also a certified facilitator in palliative care, in learning how to live well during the palliative process. And so I do a lot of training with physicians and nurses about how to normalize things that go on through that process as well. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that I'm not going to say that I know what you're feeling or know what you're thinking, but I do have some people in my life that struggle and live every day with chronic pain, and so I have been the support for them. So if you hear something that you think, well, why the heck is she saying that? Like she doesn't know anything about that. Maybe I don't, and that's okay. So if I say something and you kind of think, oh, that makes me mad, or why is she saying that? Just hang on. You don't have to take that with you. So take my talk today as kind of like going to the grocery store. When you go, you grab your cart and you see some things that you like, and you see some things that you need today, but you don't need next week. Pick and take the things with you that are going to resonate with you today. And then, if something kind of caught your attention, pick it up a couple of weeks from now, just like you would at the grocery store. So take what you can from it. And, if I can answer any questions for you, I'll sure do that. But certainly don't hesitate to ask. If I see questions in the chat, I probably won't stop and answer them because some of them will be answered as we go. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to get started and let's see if I can make everything work on my new computer. Okay, so I named this Managing Stress, Acknowledging Grief Through Life Transitions, only because I think grief is something we need to talk about. Sometimes we call everything stress and we talk about, this stressed me out, but rarely do we actually think, boy, that must be grief that's biting me today. So one of my things is looking at normalizing grief and looking at what it really is. And this is all stuff that I think you may have a totally different way you think about it, and that's great. So we're going to talk a bit about what is grief. And these are your core ones. They've been around for a long time. And it's the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And there's been lots of takeoffs on them over the years, but they all kind of bubble down to the same thing. It's denial. So why did this happen? It's your body's normal reaction to something you don't want. Okay. So it's, you try to rationalize it, it's overwhelming emotions. It's a defense mechanism. What denial does is it buffers you, right? It gives you that space between the immediate shock of the loss, whatever that loss may be. And we're going to talk a bit about that in the next slide. Anger is a big one, because really seriously, it's okay to be really darn right mad when things change and there's losses in your life. Because things aren't the same, right? And anger is a typical emotion. It's a place where a lot of people get stuck, and it's a really hard place to move through. So anger is one that we're going to talk about a bit, because it's when the pain of the loss kind of takes root and you go, are you kidding me? Really? No, I'm not okay with this. And that's okay. That's a perfectly normal reaction. The next one is bargaining. And I don't know if any of you have ever bargained. My mom tells me I'm like a chief negotiator, right? I always think, well, what if we did it this way? Or how about this, right? And it's the same with grief. And bargaining is an attempt to minimize the pain, right? To say like, geez, if I'd have done something different, if I'd have gone to the doctor first, if my, daughter had driven a different way, if things had, what if? Sometimes it's a way to try to make sense of feelings of guilt or responsibility. And it can keep going for a long time. People often what if and should for a long time throughout their lives, right? And that's all bargaining. The next one is depression. Some people call it depression. Some people call it chronic sadness. It's kind of when everything sinks in, right? And it's like, wow, okay, so this is where I'm at, right? And it's the reality and the realization of the reality. And sometimes it's that deep, kind of overwhelming, like, wow, this is where I actually get to be. I don't know that I want to be here with that. And the last one that we'll talk about is acceptance. And acceptance isn't, woohoo, like I'm all good and everything's great and, all sunshine and roses. Acceptance really seriously just means that you kind of realize that this is what you've got, and you laid it to rest and thought, okay, this is where I have to be. And that's when the growth can happen and the looking at new ways of moving through that. So I'm going to make that real simple, I'm going to tell you a little story. I have a friend who has written a book on grief, and she does a lot of work on grief. And she explains grief in terms of something that might happen to you every day. And I think that's how we have to look at grief. So she says she showed up at work one morning and she forgot her glasses. And her first thought was, I did not forget them. They've got to be in my purse. They've got to be somewhere. I can't have forgotten them. I can't have been that stupid. I need them to work. I can't. Denial, right? And then she said, then I just got mad. How could I be so stupid? How could I leave them there? How could I, I know I have to have them to work. I know I need them. What's wrong with me? It's anger. And then her bargaining, well, if I put my screen far enough back, maybe I'll be able to see okay. Or, if I sit at a certain angle, maybe I'll be able to read parts of it today. What can I do? What can I try to make work? And then the depression of, crap, nothing's going to work. I'm just stuck here with no glasses and I can't see. And then she said her last one was acceptance, when she said she looked at her desk and went, those are reading glasses. If I take a minute and go up to the dollar store, I could get another pair and I can read. So it's a simple and almost silly example, but I think it's such a great example about how we experience grief every day. And if we start to normalize it and think about it in those terms, then it's not so overwhelming and it's not so scary, right? So I think about it all the time. Things like I'm often late for work, just a little bit, like 2 or 3 minutes. And I think about that on my way and I'm like, I can't be doing this again. Are you kidding me? I left early. I'm sure I should be there on time, right? And then I'm mad at myself because seriously, what is wrong with me that I cannot leave 5 minutes earlier? And then I bargain, well, I wonder if I take this cut across road, if I could get there any faster, maybe I could do this. And then I'm just sad that I'm such a putz and I can't get to work on time. And then I've come to the acceptance that if I get there right on time and I leave a couple minutes late, it's going to be okay. So those are the ways sometimes I just stop and think about the day-to-day things that happen. And it's not like you want to put a label on it and say, oh, that's grief. Oh, that's grief. But sometimes it helps normalize bigger griefs when you can understand the smaller griefs, if that makes some sense. So when we talk about grief, often people only talk about grief that comes with death. And I think that's kind of the part that's left us all at a different kind of loss, because when you're grieving other losses, people don't give you the same kind of space or the same kind of attention or the same kind of maybe gentle kindness, right? As they do if you're grieving something that they consider, large, because we just don't call things grief. But what about when you get separated or divorced? Even if you're happy about that, it's still a loss, and it's still the grief of what could have been, right? Loss of mobility. This is my mom, and this is a loss her and I talk about all the time. And she's really had to grieve her way through because she's a woman who likes to do and be, and debilitating back pain has got her so she can't move and she can't do any of the things she used to do. And for a while, she was so cranky that we could hardly have a conversation. And when we did have one, she would start to cry. And I didn't know how to help her. And one day I just said, like, are you going to ever grieve this loss, or are you just going to be upset forever? And she snapped at me, which was really kind of not cool, but it was real. But after she said to me, you know what, nobody's named that for me before. I hadn't. And my mom's a counselor. She's actually one of the smartest women I've ever met. And she was able to look at it once somebody named it. And once she named it, that the loss of her mobility was a huge, huge loss. And it was a grief that she had to go through. We had to talk about it on Saturday when I told her I was doing this. And she said, my most important thing is when I actually named it grief and figured out that I had to work through the steps and actually call it what it was. So anyway, that's a little personal story, but I was really impressed with her ability to do that. And now, she said, I'm not upset anymore, and I'm not crying, and it's not that she doesn't, but it's not all the time, right? So it's just to lessen that burden on her. Things like infertility, chronic illness. Loss of a friend, like somebody who's been a close friend, all of a sudden they're gone, and doesn't mean they died, but they've moved or they've just chosen to not be friends. It's huge, right? Financial problems, loss of a job, retirement, empty nest, children leaving home, moving, being the victim of a scam. Like if you think about the steps of grief that I talked about, those are the steps we go through with all of these things. Loss of health, loss of independence. I work in home care, and for me, that's one that I counsel about all the time, is a loss of the ability to just live life as you like it and do things that you want to do. And we don't name that often enough out loud and say what a huge loss that is, and how frustrating it is, and how angry it makes people. And I think that we do people a disservice when we don't acknowledge it and acknowledge as a loss. So I have a sheet that actually has another like 20 different things that we can look at as losses, and I'm going to send it to Celine so she can send it out, because it's actually a little bit enlightening when we really look at what are the things that we could call loss. And it kind of is overwhelming. Oh my goodness, these things happen all the time. Are we just stuck in grief forever? And no, but it's normal. And that's the part that we just have to, in my opinion, start talking about, that it's part of life. Grief is. So basically for me, how I would describe it is, grief is an emotional and psychological process. And like all processes, it's got a beginning and an end. The trick is, it's not a straight line from start to finish, right? So if you're running a race and they tell you, here's the start and here's the finish, you go like this and you know you're there. Well, grief does this. And it's all over the place. And you might have, your child is leaving home and you're retiring and your husband gets sick and you're, all happening at the same time. So it's not a linear piece. And that's why it can be kind of really quite ugly sometimes. But that's where the stress comes in, because if you don't resolve the grief, it can cause overwhelming stress. And so if you just recognize and deal with it, it can have a positive impact on your stress management too. And I make that sound so simple and so easy, and it's so not. But honestly, just naming it is the start. And that part is probably the hardest step of all. And that's the part that I would love to be able to help with. So, because grief takes its toll on a body. Like if you're stressed and you say, oh, I'm stressed, grief is similar, right? Your heart is racing, you get all sweaty. Sometimes, intense anger over a long time can make you feel really rotten, right? And intense sadness over a long time. It all, if it's an emotional and psychological process, also takes its toll physically. So what we want to do is try to figure out how to lower the stress hormones that are shooting all the time, right? Because we don't want to make things worse. So it sounds like an easy process. I'm going to give you some tools that might help a little bit. Basically, I want to give you something to chew on. That's it, to think about whether this might be helpful or not. Okay, so now we know about grief, we know about stress. What does it mean and what do we do with it? Do we say, how do we mute her? Will she stop talking if we could just mute her? No, I won't. I'll just keep talking. So at its core, grief is transformation. And grief is about accepting all the things that come with loss. And I would suggest including chronic pain. And this is from, I have a young daughter who's in a bad accident and she struggles with chronic pain that will never go away in her leg because of that. And, it's been really fabulously fascinating to watch her go through those steps and start to incorporate that it's part of what she does. Is she a glowing ray of sunshine about it? No, not always. But it's pretty cool to see sometimes when she just has figured out what it means to just acknowledge that grief and make space for that healing. And I think resolving grief, it sets a stage for you to be able to create your new reality. What does it look like? No, it doesn't look like before at all. But what can it look like? And maybe we won't like it the way we thought we liked our other reality, but maybe it could be okay in a different way. So grieving through transitions in life, it creates a healthy awareness of our responses, right? Because my experience of grief and Michelle's experience of grief, and Kathy, I'm going to pick on you because I can see you. Kathy's experience of grief are all going to be different because of our childhood, our background, our psychology, our education, our life experiences, all those things are going to change it. So what it does is allows you to become aware of what it looks like for you. And it, in that way, it normalizes those stressors. So if you feel yourself like just getting something happened and you're just way up here, sometimes just knowing about it can make you go, oh, I know what that's about. And it can help you bring it down. So it's normalizing the process, helping you understand where you're at. And eventually, once you've worked through some of it, it helps you be able to feel when you're at a bit of a resolution phase. And that's a really nice feeling when you can tell in your own body, in your own mind that, hey, I think I'm kind of okay with that right now. That was a conversation I had with my mom on Saturday. She said, one day I just went, I'm not going to say I like this ever, but I actually think maybe I'm okay with it right now because it's what I've got and I think I'm okay to move forward. That's really freeing to be able to do that. And it takes a lot of work. So this is my first thought. Give yourself a break. We are awfully hard on ourselves, harder than anybody else is on us. I kind of want to be this puppy because it looks like he's fairly comfy. So recognize and acknowledge that grief exists and it's normal. Everyone goes through it at different levels, at different pieces, at different times, in different ways, but everyone goes through it. And grief does not mean that you're wailing and gnashing your teeth. Like that is not the grief that, that's the grief we see on TV and the grief we see. It can just be denial and shutting that off, or fearfulness. It can be anger. It can just be pain that just hurts, right? Inside, that kind of pain. It can be loathing. It can be guilt. It can be all sorts of things. But just recognize and acknowledge that it's there. That's the first step to doing anything. And don't be so hard on yourself. Give yourself a break because it leaves you emotionally vulnerable. And so by being able to step back and kind of just be kind to yourself, that's the first step. And reach out. You don't have to reach out to a fancy professional. You can reach out to a friend. You can reach out to somebody you see in the grocery store. I find all the people I talk to say that when they actually feel heard, things settle a little bit for them. So what does that mean? Does that just mean they're talking and talking and talking and they're hoping somebody's listening? Being heard means that you talk and someone actually listens and acknowledges that must be really awful. And that's a wonderful feeling when you can have someone do that and acknowledge and validate your grief and your feelings. And you may not see the value in that, but I encourage you to think about what happens when you have somebody actively engage and listen right to you, like just where you feel like, holy smokes, they're actually hearing what I have to say. It's a beautiful feeling. And so many people don't get that. So if you don't have someone in your life that does that, I encourage you to find someone. I've been going to a counselor for years because I am a counselor. And I think as a counselor, I need to have a counselor to make sure that I can do the best I can for the people that I serve. And, sometimes I go there and I think, well, I don't know why I'm going today. I have nothing to talk about. And an hour later, I come out and I haven't shut up for a whole hour. And I'm like, wow, okay, I actually had a lot to talk about, right? Michelle and I talk on the way to work a lot of mornings because we both have a commute. And it's really a nice connection and a nice way to start the day because I feel heard each day before I start. So find those connections and reach out to find them. And it's not easy. But if you can't find someone in your circle, then reach out of your circle. Find some professionals. There's lots of places, lots of people out there. I think this group is fabulous. I think it's probably more valuable than anyone realizes. So reach out. The reason I say this is because grief will always have its day. It's not something that you can say, no, I am not going to deal with you, so you can just go away. It's not like a telemarketer. You actually have to let it have its day. So I always suggest, why don't you just schedule time for it then? Like, give it its space. My one son had a heck of a time last year with COVID and school and just a lot of things that kind of collapsed on his head all at once. And he was really struggling. And he started journaling. I bought him 2 journals. I thought it would be enough for a year. And I just said to him in the morning, why don't you just, if you're feeling kind of all over the place and awful, why don't you just write a few things down, see what happens? Well, it's almost a year. I think he's filled 29 journals last time I talked to him. He writes every single day as a habit. And he said he's never felt better in his life because it's given him an outlet and a way to spend 30 minutes just processing what's in his brain so that it's gone out of his brain and he can carry on. So that to me was the very best example I've ever seen of, because I tell everyone to journal and everyone ignores me. So just seeing somebody actually do it and see the beautiful gift that it was to them, it was great. And I can't believe one of my kids actually listened to me and thought I was smart enough to take some advice from me. So journaling is fabulous. And if you don't want to spend 30 minutes, I challenge you that at the end of the day, write down 5 things you're grateful for that day. And after 2 or 3 weeks, you'd be amazed at how much your mind shifts when you just journal that much. So it doesn't have to be a big, huge commitment. It can be just something small. If you're not grateful for anything each day, be grateful the day's over. And maybe the next day you can think of something else to be grateful for. It doesn't have to be a beautiful, flowery piece of work. See a therapist. I mean, some people like to see them once a week, once every 6 months, whatever works for you. This support group, schedule some time with your friends. If you don't have any friends, that's okay. You've got a support group, find some people that are in the same boat as you. Schedule some time for you. And the reason I say that is no matter how busy your life is, if you can put yourself first and give your grief some space at the top of your priority list, it won't always need that space. And that's the beautiful part about letting it have its day. Because when you don't, it just comes back and bites you when you least expect it. So it's best if you can, and doesn't mean it's never going to come back, right? Like you think it's all taken care of and I've arrived and I'm doing good. And one day something triggers you and you go, are you kidding me? I was done with this. What is this here for? But you know about it now. It doesn't stay that long. So let it have its day, let it have its minutes and give it space. And you will be pleasantly surprised how well it behaves when you give it its space. Okay, so I like this cat. I have a mule that does yoga, but I couldn't find the picture. So nurture your body too. And I know from talking to my mom, I always say to her, Mom, you got to get some exercise. And she always says to me, seriously, it hurts. I'm not going to exercise. So what she started to do, and it actually makes me giggle, but I think it's brilliant. They live between 2 small towns. So she, instead of going for groceries once a week, she manages to get there twice a week. It is not an easy task for her to get in her vehicle and to get there. But she said she can walk if she can push the cart. And they live on a farm, so she can't go outside, with a walker or anything because it's too rough. So she goes for groceries twice a week, and she makes a lap through every aisle because she can move if she has the cart. And she said, I know it's just a little bit, but boy, do I feel better after I do it. And I said to her, you're brilliant. Like you took what somebody else would be like, well, like you just went for groceries. But for her, it's a huge workout. Like she goes home and has to lay down because it's such a big workout, but she's made it part of her routine. And so for me, I think that's the cool part is that, my sister runs 10 kilometers a day. I will only run if something big and hairy and awful is chasing me. And so, everybody's got to do different things and what works for them, right? So walking is, if you can, I've got an older lady who does chair yoga, and I didn't even know what that was. So she showed me one day. And, she does kind of like 3 or 4 stretches like this, and her one arm doesn't go as high, and she kind of twists a bit. And she said, it's all I can do, but I can do that. So she does it every day, right? So stretching, I got another one that she can do this. She can do no and yes. And so that's what she does. And that's all she does. I've got other people who do 2, 3 yogas a day. You find what works for you, but nurture your body. And if movement really is not going to work and you can't move, just maybe sit, outside, get out in nature a little bit, do some gentle movement, listen to music, meditate, read. These are all things you've heard before. But honestly, if you've never tried meditation, you might really want to give it a whirl. It's a pretty fantastic thing. And I thought it was silly because I didn't think I could numb my brain long enough to listen. But it's pretty cool when you do it and you actually force yourself to relax. Your body notices it too. So nurture your body. If you can do what that cat does, well, all the power to you. I think I'd never get up again if I did that. So, okay, this one is important. You've got to breathe with purpose. Okay, so we all breathe, right? Everybody's breathing right now. We found out how much we breathe when we have glasses and a mask because everything fogs up. So we breathe all the time. But if you breathe with purpose, it can help. I used to work the burn unit, if that helps. So one of my jobs in the burn unit as a social worker was to do breathing exercises while patients' burn dressings were changed. And it was a form of distraction to help with the pain management. And I was a very young social worker, and I absolutely could not figure out how they thought that was going to help. And I was actually really appalled that they thought that was something that was going to work. And boy, did they prove me wrong. And my patients were the ones who proved me wrong. And they said, it does work. It helps. It gives me something to focus on. Changes, it slows my heart down. So now I'm a big proponent of breathing with purpose. So I've got some handouts I'm going to send along, but the one that I really love is 4 square breathing, or it's called box breathing. And if you can count to 4, if you have 4 fingers, 4 toes, whatever you need to count, you can do this one. So basically what it is you take a deep breath in through your nose and you count to 4. I'm going to explain it and then I'm going to make you do it. And then you hold that breath to the count of 4. And then you blow that breath out your mouth to the count of 4. And then you hold that without breathing back in to a count of 4. And then you do it 4 times. So if you can remember 4, you can do this one. So are you guys game to try it? I won't know if you're doing it, so it's okay. But I'm going to count it out. Okay. So, and I can't do it and count. So just know that I'm going to count with you. Ready? So breathe in through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out through your mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now hold, don't breathe back in. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're not going to do it 4 times, but it's that simple. So it's just box breathing. And what does it do? I'm actually going to read. It actually reduces blood pressure and it decreases cortisol. And cortisol is a stress hormone. So when it starts flooding, that's your fight or flight. And oh my God, like I'm going nuts. I got to either fight with you or I got to run away, right? It goes back to the times when, the big hairy mammoth would come over the hill and they had to decide whether they were going to, fight it or run away. So it's a hardwire in our brain. And so if we can do that, do the breathing, it actually settles everything and it decreases that stress hormone and it actually reduces panic and it reduces anxiety. And you can say, how can just a little bit of breathing do that? I would challenge you to give it a try and see if you notice it make a difference. The other one is 6 and 10 breathing. I learned this one actually during a first aid class many years ago. And I've used it in anxiety trainings ever since. I was taught it in a first aid class to slow down the heart if I happened to come across somebody who was having a heart attack. And then I thought, well, if it slows down the heart for that, then wouldn't it slow it down for anxiety? And so I started using it with some of my students when I worked in education. So it's breathe into the count of 6 through your nose and breathe out to the count of 10 through your mouth. Sounds like it should be not that hard. Well, guess what? When you have to push out more than you took in, you have to really concentrate on that. And what it does is engages your diaphragm, engages your whole core, and it does actually make a difference. Would you like to try this one? Everybody is not nodding, so I'm going to say yes, let's try this one. It's in through your nose to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out through your mouth to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you can see how you have to push a little.
We lost you for a sec.
My internet connection says it's unstable. Maybe.
Oh,
There we go.
I was just gonna say that, we share the brain, and so I took 3 deep breaths. So yes.
So this is the last one. It's a grounding technique. I'm going to send this out because it's something that's really important. And it's something that if you practice it when you're not stressed, it's easier to pull it into use when you are stressed. So it's a way to focus yourself back into where you are, because what stress does, it takes you out here, right? And so what grounding does, it brings you back to where you are. So it's to focus on 5 things that you can see, like the dude in the sunglasses. It's 4 things you can touch. It's 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Honestly, if you can get through the whole thing, or if someone you know is struggling and you can read it, you can talk them through it, it just takes you from here right down to here. It's a beautiful, beautiful gift. The 3-3-3 rule is similar. It's look around you, name 3 things you see, name 3 sounds you hear, and move 3 parts of your body. Right? Whatever you need to do, 3, 3, and 3. So I'm going to send those out, but they work if you try them. So, all right. So basically, be gentle with yourself, set reasonable goals. Try setting simple but definitive intentions. Try one thing to help you move forward and to help you avoid getting stuck in the negative emotions that can be grief. And you do get stuck in them. Absolutely you do. And people can be stuck in them for years. And you can live that way, I guess, if you chose to, or you can choose to move out of them. But just if you try to do one thing different each day, that'll make a big difference. And I think it's also be patient. Be so patient with yourself. Resolving grief is not, and even bringing down your stress, it's not quick and easy work. It's not like, oh, magic, we're good. But it's so worth it. And so are you. I mean, give yourself some space and take care of yourself. It's worth the journey. So I'm just going to peek into the chat. Michelle, is there anything in the chat that needs an answer? Okay. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to go because I know we have somebody else I'm so excited to listen to speak. And then if there's any questions, if you hand them through Celine or Michelle, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right. Well, thank you, Susan. That was lovely. So, okay. So it is now my pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker for today, Amanda Wood. Amanda is a city girl born and raised in Regina. Family is everything to Amanda. She enjoys spending time with family, friends, her husband, Brady, their 17-month-old son, Lucas, and her 2 dogs, Oakley, the pit bull, and Honey, the pug. Amanda has struggled with lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, underactive thyroid, and Raynaud syndrome for 15 years, and she is only 28 years old. More than half of her life, she has dealt with chronic pain, but that doesn't stop her from being her happy, energized self. Please join me in welcoming Amanda.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I want to thank everyone for listening to me today. I'm very excited to share my story, and hopefully it resonates with a lot of you and what maybe you go through yourself. So yes, exactly what my bio kind of said. I'm 28 years old, but when I was 13, I was diagnosed with lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Raynaud's, underactive thyroid, and I got them all within a week of each other. I probably was diagnosed, I should have been diagnosed probably 2 years before that, because that's when I started to feel pain. I loved cheerleading growing up. I had been in cheerleading since I was almost in kindergarten. And I really started to feel some pain when I was about 11 years old. I noticed when I was doing tumbling or any type of cartwheel, I noticed that I would have pain in my wrist and I couldn't hold, it's like my wrist couldn't hold my weight. It was really, really odd. We went to doctor after doctor for many years, and it took a long time, I think, to finally get the diagnosis. So a little bit about my story. I got put on a lot of medications in the beginning. It was actually quite sick, if I'm going to be honest, because my dad lives in Mission, BC, and I'd have to fly to see him. And I'd have this big, giant Ziploc bag full of pills. I was on 15 different medications in the beginning. And the doctor that I was with, I don't think realized that a lot of them were kind of reacting with each other because I gained a lot of weight. I felt very uncomfortable, and being like 13 to 15 years old, when you gain that much weight right away, you just don't feel like yourself. And that's what happened with me. So it took a really long time to find a really good doctor. But luckily, I found the doctor that I was supposed to be with. How does pain impact my everyday life? Well, with what I deal with, lupus, I've been told that the nickname is like the disease of 1,000 faces because it literally acts up when it wants to. I can literally do nothing and wake up with an attack. I could trip and accidentally like fall into my countertop or like a doorway or hit my elbow on something, and boom, just whatever impact happened in that spot, I'll have an attack. And it's wild. Like when I met my husband, he's helped me with so much. He has been there to put my hair in a ponytail because I can't use my arms. He's been there to dress me, to help me bathe. He's been there through a lot because there's a lot of things that I couldn't do. I am getting better now, but in the very beginning, it was not okay. My best friend and roommate at the time would have to help me open water bottles. There was a point where water bottles were like my enemy, and I could not get the caps off. I drove a stick for a long time, a manual car, and even like just changing the gears was something that was just impossible. So is everyday little things that sometimes I just have to accept that I can't do. But there's a lot of days like today where I don't have any pain, and I don't feel anything today, but I could definitely feel something tomorrow. So I just mentally prepare myself for that. And with being so young, it sucks because when I tell people what I have, they just want to understand how I deal with it. And I don't have a choice really. So I do have to make sure that I am, thinking of myself and my family. I have a 17-month-old son. And even having that pregnancy experience was scary because I was told even before we started trying that there's things I need to know and be aware of. So when having kids, I have a high chance of miscarriages. And also all of my children that I'll have will probably be on the smaller side because I have lupus, and my son was on the smaller side. So I have to understand that, and I have to accept that if children is what I wanted, and they are what I want. And my blood pressure just went skyrocket at the very end with my son and being pregnant. So that was very scary. I was on bed rest at the very end. They tried to induce me a month early because they were worried about my blood pressure and they were worried about him. So they tried to induce me early, a month early, and my body said no. They tried everything. I can't experience with even having lupus. I can't trying to be induced for any of those mothers that are on here or listening to this. They did 8 different inducing methods on me. I in my life will never experience hopefully that pain ever again because my body just was saying no, like it's not time. I'm proud of my body for doing that because he was very small even when he was born. So I'm glad that my body said, no, it's not time yet. We need to wait. So he was born just a couple days before his due date, which is excellent. And he was still on the smaller side. But even with having lupus, I was warned about that. I have been on medications only when I have flare-ups. So how have I managed my pain and what do I find helpful over time? So I've been on many medications. In the very beginning, I was on a medication called methotrexate, if anybody's familiar with it. I was injecting for many years. So I'd have to inject behind my arms, in my stomach, or in my upper thighs. And I had to inject once a week. I would throw up constantly. I lost all my hair. My hair, I was just straightening my hair one day and about clumps like this long were just falling off. My hair was as short as like my earlobes. So for a teenage girl, I was 15 at the time. It was really hard to see that. So from 15 to 20, I spent thousands of dollars on hair extensions. And it was because as a young woman, I wanted long hair and I didn't feel myself with short hair. So that was very difficult to go through. And managing the pain, unfortunately, was the medication. I couldn't get off of it. My doctor did not want me to be off of it. And so when I decided I wanted to have a baby, methotrexate had to be out of my system completely. So I kind of told my doctor, I'm ready to stop and let's try something else. So hydroxychloroquine is what I was prescribed next. And it's a very mild medication if anybody has been on it or experienced it. The side effects aren't that terrible. You do have to get your eyes checked once a year because they can damage your retinas, which is kind of unfortunate, but luckily mine have been okay. But hydroxychloroquine helps me when I have an attack, but I'm so glad I'm off of the methotrexate because that was a very strong medication for myself anyway. It did not react well for me. But I am possibly, I'm here to share that I was still even having attacks with methotrexate, and that's scary because that wasn't supposed to happen. But I just decided I wanted to have a baby. I stopped all the medications when I was 21. With methotrexate, I stopped, and it took a long time for the meds to get out of my system. And I was able to kind of talk about having children at around 25. So that was really good. And one piece of advice that has always stuck with me is when I was diagnosed, lupus is usually hereditary. So it does run in my mom's side of the family. And my mom's cousin had lupus. So when I was diagnosed, officially diagnosed at 13, my mom took me to see him. And he had been struggling with lupus for a long time. And he kind of gave me some advice that no doctor would have told me. I had never met anybody who had lupus. And being so young, I didn't know what to expect. You can read things on a pamphlet all you want, but until you actually talk with somebody about what they're going through, that's what I needed. So he sat me down and he said, and I still talk to myself this way because I have to listen to his voice sometimes. But he said, every day, Amanda, you're going to have to wake up and you're going to have to decide if Amanda's going to win or lupus is going to win. Because it's going to be one or the other. And you're going to have to decide which one it's going to be. So sometimes when I have really bad days, like if my elbow decides it needs to stay locked and I can't bend it straight, I have to decide if I'm going to keep moving or if I'm going to let lupus win, I'm going to be in my feelings and I'm going to be sad that day. But he has taught me a lot. He taught me that it's going to suck sometimes and there's going to be things that I can't help, but I have to push through if I need to, and I have to be strong for myself. And I've always carried that with me. That advice has always stayed with me. Hearing people's stories, I don't think you connect with anybody until you actually hear what they're going through and then resonate with them. And that's why I wanted to speak today, because we talked about that today. We talked about grief and we heard all about the stages of grief. But it's important to remember, but it's important to move on, because I have days like that as well, where sometimes giving up seems like it's the easiest thing to do, but we can't take the easy way out. We have to be strong. And it's easy to say that. It's easy for anybody to say that we need to be strong. But I've been there too, especially when I was in post-secondary education for only a month because I had a lupus attack that it affected both of my saliva glands. And it looked like I ate 2 baseballs. Like the ends of my cheeks were ginormous. I looked like a real live chipmunk over here. And my doctor pulled me out of school. She said, Amanda, you can't continue to go. I know you want to go. So I had to walk away. And that was the hardest thing because I was really proud of myself for getting into post-secondary. I was really proud of myself. Grade 10 was the worst time in my life because I missed a lot of school and I had to almost repeat the grade, but luckily I didn't have to. But it was so close that I almost had to, and I almost didn't graduate on time. There's been a lot of challenges for myself In the beginning was really hard. But luckily, I don't know what it is, to be honest with you. I'm not on any medications right now. And I know a lot of people can't do that. I know a lot of people can't say I'm not taking anything anymore. But there was a point in time where I decided I'm done. I think I was really upset with the side effects that all the medications have. I was still having attacks on these medications. And I just decided, no, I'm done. So, like I said, I'm not on anything right now. So I've been on methotrexate, I've been on hydroxychloroquine, and then I decided I'm no longer going to take anything else. And I barely have attacks now. I don't know if I work out though. I eat right. I work out. I keep myself healthy. I am constantly on the go. If anybody knows me, I have been nicknamed Energizer Bunny. I just constantly go. I'm always doing things for people. I volunteer. So I volunteer at the Big Brothers Big Sisters of Regina. So I have a little who I've been matched with for the past 5 years, and she is 9 now. Today's actually her birthday, so this is kind of fitting. But she's just amazing, and it's reaching out and helping others who need somebody to be in their life, and I can be there for somebody. And I think it's important because if I had somebody to talk to when I was 13 and first diagnosed, I think I would have acted and felt a little bit different than I did at 13. And it's important to me. I love photography, so I take pictures all the time. It's my passion. I do family photos for people who can't afford them, and I don't charge anything because it brings me such joy just to see the smile on people's faces when they get their photos taken. Like I said, I love to volunteer, and that's just what makes me happy. And in the beginning, it was very rough. I dealt with a lot of childhood trauma as well, but you persevere and you bring yourself back up. And I don't let it get to me, but at the same time, I had to grow up young and it sucked, but that's just kind of what happened. But my son, or my children, right now I just have one, but I hope to have two more. My children will know the strength that their mom has and where that comes from and why. And I think that's important to know. But for anybody who just it doesn't feel right with their, like I said, with all the medications they're on, because I've been there. The airport, when I talked about that big Ziploc bag, I had to talk to like 8 different officials because they wanted to know why so many medications had to be taken on the plane. And I couldn't answer. I was 13 at the time with a whole bunch of these medications. So if it doesn't feel right, you have to ask about it. And I did, but it took many years. And like I said, all the weight gain I had to go through, and I lost my hair. So there's a lot of things that you'll go through in life, but you'll get where you want to be. And I'm proud to say that all of this is mine. There's no extensions anymore. But yeah, that's my story. And I know that I don't have much time to keep talking. I can talk forever. That's the problem with me, is I can talk forever. So I can open the floor for any questions anybody has, or if I missed anything, please let me know.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Susan and Amanda for sharing their time with us today. Also, a big thank you to each and every one of you for being here. Just a couple other housekeeping pieces. Recordings of the webinars will be available on the Saskatchewan website, and the link will be shared through email for you. An email will be sent out tomorrow with any slides that the speaker shared, and the handouts that Susan had talked about, and any other helpful links. It will also include a link to an evaluation. Please be sure to complete the evaluation and provide us with any feedback that you might have. Thank you again to today's sponsor for this session, the Saskatchewan Workers' Compensation Board. Our next webinar is going to be on Tuesday, March 15th at 6:30 p.m. And our theme for the webinar is medication and pain management. And please share information about this webinar with your family and social circles and friends. So however you signed up for it, if you just forward them the email, it has Celine's email on it, and she can help them get signed up for the webinars. It's really, really helpful for people. I'd like to to thank both the presenters today. Does anybody else have any more questions before we go? Bye, everybody.